shall reign. He shall reign. He shall reign in my heart and in my soul. He shall reign.
We're going to read from there in just a few minutes, but I want to preface the reading a little bit with some thoughts for you to consider. In the past week, I noticed an article on Facebook, and you might have saw it too. Possibly not though, because it's by a gospel preacher that I'm friends with, so I get the opportunity to see some of his messages. However, the message that he wrote about is something you'll read about. You can read about on the internet in one form or another, but the application might be where we might differ. But he entitles the article Red Sea Moments. I don't know if you've ever read that or not or heard of that, but when I'm done today, I hope it's going to affect you, because you're going to find that you've had some of those Red Sea moments. And so remember the story in Exodus 14. Let me get over there. I'm not going to read it yet, because I want to talk about it a little bit. Remember the story, just kind of give you an overview of that story, is that the Israelites, Jacob and his family, moved to Egypt because of a famine. And of course, Joseph preceded that by the hand of God and the providence of God. And that's another story all of itself, an amazing story of how Joseph rises to power in Egypt, being only second into the Pharaoh himself, and had tremendous responsibility. Because of that, all of God's people, and as I'm telling you this story, you need to realize I'm telling you the story of Jesus. Because everything we're going to talk about here is leading to the lineage, leading eventually to the Christ. And so God is behind this whole thing, and he does things a certain way. And I can tell you right now, probably not the way we would do it. And God works in a way that we don't always understand. And this story about Red Sea moments is going to be a classic example of that. So there was probably somewhere around 70 different members of Jacob's family, I believe, that I've read about. And there's some discrepancy about how many there actually was. But of course, all of his brothers and his father and those that were with him. And they moved to the land of Goshen, and they were there for about 430 years. And they multiplied. The Bible scriptures say they multiplied. Verse 1, verse 7. In fact, they multiplied in such a great way that I think it concerned Pharaoh. And of course, the Pharaoh at the time of Joseph had died. And several pharaohs later, they had forgotten who these people were. And as we know, the story began to use them as slaves and persecute them and do things. These are God's people. This is the lineage to Christ that's being treated this way. They didn't have any clue what that meant. And so by the time, 430 years later, that it's time that God has decided it's time for them to leave Egypt and go to the Promised Land. It's uncertain just how many people there were. Some have said there were millions. I don't know if that's true. And one thing you can do is you can go a little further in the future from the Exodus to Numbers chapter 1, where they number everyone. And there was 603,000 men, roughly, over 20. That's how they did it. And so then if you then figure out the women that would have been with them and the children and so forth, there might have been a couple of million. I don't think there was a couple of million at the time of the Exodus. And when you read commentaries, they're suggesting maybe more like a couple 100,000, but it could have been higher. It was a huge amount. Whatever it was a huge amount of people. And of course, we all know that the way they were to do this Exodus is they had to walk. There would be handicapped people amongst them. There would be children. There would be sickly people. And they had their animals. They had all their possessions that they were able to take. That's what they had. And they take this exodus, and they're heading to the land of Canaan eventually. Somehow, some way, some say Moses was a terrible commander, and God led the people to be trapped at the Red Sea. I think even Pharaoh thought that. If you watch the movie of the Ten Commandments, it certainly wouldn't be stretching things at all for Pharaoh to see where the people are going and see that they had led themselves into an absolute trap with no way to survive if he decided to attack them. And he decided to do that. Decided that even though he let them go, the Bible says his heart was hardened, that he regretted that he did that, and decided he was going to go there and annihilate them. And he took hundreds of chariots and soldiers, and of course most of these people weren't able to fight and defend themselves, and were in no position to do that anyways. And so the Israelites find themselves here at the Red Sea with nowhere to go, and the Egyptians pursuing them. The Red Sea, we're not exactly sure where that location was, but we have some ideas about where it was. And of course, the Red Sea was not the same all the way through it. There were places where it was many, many miles wide, as much as 100 miles wide. That seems pretty big. I never realized it could be that way. I don't think that was the case where they parted, where God parted the Red Sea. And it suggested that it might have been a few miles wide. The Red Sea in various parts of it was as much as 1,000 feet deep. Now that's incredible. We think about it, because God is going to part the Red Sea, and there's going to be walls of water. And imagine the wall of water being as high as 1,000 foot high, and you walking down in there in between the two walls of water. 1,000 feet, to give you an example, would be something like 3 football fields tall. But that, at the point before God did this, the people don't know He's going to do this. I think this is the first time in history that a river had been parted. It's not the last time. We know Elijah and Elisha are going to do it several times. And so there's a number of times when it's done later. But this time it had never been done, and no one really knew what God's capable of doing, although they had already observed some of His power before this and what He was capable of. They find themselves trapped at the water with these soldiers pursuing them. And we're going to read about it. And when we read about it, you're going to see that they're going to make comments like, what? It would have been better. It'd been better if we just stayed in Egypt and been slaves of Pharaoh than to let God lead me on the journey I need to go down. And so that's a Red Sea moment when you cannot see the future. You can't see how you're going to get out of it. In fact, you're not going to get out of it. Not through natural means. It's just there's no hope. Now, all of us have had some of these moments. And I just want to, before we read the actual case, I want to talk about some of these moments, because just about everybody in here has had some Red Sea moments. It might be an illness that we can't seem to conquer, and months and months and months and medications and everything, and it just doesn't seem to be working. It might be a marriage that we're struggling in, or it might be a financial situation that's dire, or it might be a decision that we're wrestling with that keeps us up at night because we can't find the solution to it, and there seems to be no hope. Might be a family fracture. This one affects just about everybody here in some form or another. A family fracture that you don't know how to fix. Or a past abuse memory that replays a loop in your mind. Or an enemy who has you as the bullseye on their dartboard. I don't know if you've ever had that, but I have. Probably some of you have too. Have had enemies, and it's just as if that enemy is relentless, wanting to do what he can to destroy you or harm you. These are Red Sea moments. And there's many that I haven't listed, but moments where you're having a problem with something that you can't conquer, and you're not sure you can even live with it, You're not sure how you're going to go on in the future with it. And what do? Well, of course, we know what the answer has to be. We have to turn to God. And that's what they did at that time. And there was the only way they could do that. So let's read. We're going to read Exodus 14. But what my hope is that all of us will remember some of the Red Sea moments we've had in our life. And by the way, there may be some we haven't had yet. But there's something else here in this story that I wasn't expecting to find. And as a preacher of the gospel, I never know what I'm going to discover when I read the Bible, because I can read it to just help me support what I already believe, or I can read it to see what God wants me to believe. And in the story of the Red Sea, in this Red Sea moment in Exodus 14, we're going to find that God created it. It wasn't that Moses did a bad job of leading the people against the water to be pinned in to die. God did it. God intentionally did it so that they could see His power. And so not just the Israelites, but Pharaoh as well. What does that mean? If what I'm saying is true, and you're going to see it is, as we read Exodus 14, then could it be possible that I have found myself in a Red Sea moment myself, and I thought to myself, because of me, I have put me and my family in that position? Well, that might very well be true, and then sometimes you go, why did God let me do that? Why did God do that? Well, why did He do this in Exodus 14? That people would believe and trust Him and learn to grow with Him and let Him lead them through their journey. So some of the Red Sea moments we've all experienced in our lives, we might have created them. We might not have, but you may have wondered, where was God and why did He let this happen? He let this happen for my faith, for my growth. Is that not so? It's very possible. Let's look at Exodus 14. Verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. He told them where to go. Opposite Baal-zephon, you shall camp before it by the sea. God chose where they were going to go. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. See, the wilderness has closed them in. They're trapped. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people, and they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him, 600 choice chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, his army overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they cried, and they said to Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, had you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us out of Egypt? Now what you're experiencing here, we've all experienced. Their fear is exceeding their faith. God doesn't want you to do that. Don't let your fear of man, or whatever it is that's in your way, exceed your faith in God and the power of God. At the moment, their fear exceeded their faith. They said, verse 12, Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. That's just not true. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. Wow. What faith Moses had in God. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. Lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. I don't know how, if I would have been the Egyptians and I watched this sea parted miraculously, I don't think I would have gone down in there. I think I would have turned around and fled. Man, how hardened can the devil's followers be if they're going to pursue people that God is taking care of and miraculously leading? And he says, so I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. I'm going to stop there and not keep reading, but you could read on through the end of the chapter to see, and we know the story. He parted the sea. We don't know how tall the wall of water was, but it was very tall. Somehow he miraculously dried the land, and they went through the land, all of them, however many there was, whether it was a few hundred or a million, went through there. And God, of course, if you remember the story, he put a pillar of fire between them to slow them down, the Egyptians. Then he released it to let them go in. And they're gaining ground because the Israelites are moving too slow. And you ever notice people like that? They're just moving too slow for you. And so what does God do? He fights for them again. He has the wheels thrown off the chariots and those kind of things to make sure they're just not going to catch up. And the Israelites get all the way through, and he closes it back up and destroys all of them. Now, what we've read about is a Red Sea moment. And these people went through it, and for a moment in time, they lost their faith in God, began to question God. We could do the same. We could be saying, why did I ever become a Christian, a child of God? All I get is persecution. Nothing seems to ever go right for me. And we could make those kinds of statements and think about them that way. But I hope and pray we can see it's really not like that God is with us, and we're on a journey. And God's going to lead us through that journey. Now, you realize, we should all realize, God could have wiped out all the Egyptians long before they got to the Red Sea. And never had to even part the Red Sea. If there was another way to go around it, I don't know if there was. There's other cases in the Bible where God, just one angel can destroy that whole army. And God has an army of angels. The Bible teaches us that. We know that's true. Now, I did want to mention just briefly a couple of other Red Sea moments in the Bible. One of them is in 1 Samuel 17. And I'm not going to read that, okay? But it's in 1 Samuel 17, the story of David and Goliath. And you might say, well, there wasn't a Red Sea moment there. David didn't have a Red Sea moment. That's true. Little 13-year-old David didn't have it. But all his brothers and Saul and all the others did for 40 days. 40 days the Israelites are sitting at the foot of one mountain, and the Philistines are on the foot of another mountain and a valley between them. And in the middle of all that was Goliath, standing almost 10 feet tall, taunting them, saying, send out just one man. And of course, he's a liar. He says, send out one man, and if he kills me, we'll be your servants. Well, that wasn't true, because David does go out and kill them, and they didn't bow down, they fled. And so you can't believe the enemy, and especially if they're not of the Lord, you can't believe that. But what you have here is an army of Israelites sitting there, and if you go back and read 1 Samuel 17, they were afraid. After all God had done for them, they were afraid. Well, I just did a little research about this 10-foot giant, just under 10 foot. What little bit I was able to discover was is that his armor weighed somewhere between 200 and 300 pounds. Goliath's armor. Now you remember the armor they gave David. And David put it on. He couldn't walk. And he said, I haven't tried this. This isn't going to work. I don't need this anyways. And but that's the way that he was. He was a very strong man. I don't know what he weighed himself. I don't think it tells us that. But a 10-foot man who could carry 300 pounds of armor on him had to have been a pretty strong man. And if I understand it right, he had an armor bearer as well in front of him. And so this is a Red Sea moment for the Israelites. David comes along, and of course David, if you remember what all David said, who are these Philistines that defies the army of God, or defies God? And I'm sitting here thinking of God watching this whole thing, and if it had been me watching little David, and I've chosen David to be part of the lineage, and here he is going to go out there with no armor, with this big giant, 10-foot giant, 300 pounds of armor, and he's going to get killed, and now we're not going to have a lineage to Christ. We might think like that, physically think that way. The Israelites, I don't know what his brothers thought. And Saul was shocked. Go back and read the story. He was shocked, but when David tells his story about slewing a bear and a lion, and of course David gave God the glory. If you go back and look at it, he didn't take the glory to himself. And when you look at everything David said in that story about how he trusted God, how could God not be there for him? And he was. For many reasons, including the fact that David is part of the lineage to Jesus Christ, part of the prophecy. He's part of the whole scheme of redemption. But there was a Red Sea moment at that time, and the Israelites didn't know what to do. They just stood there. They just camped, waiting. One other one I want to look at, we're going to turn and read it, is in Acts 12. And I talk about this one too. I thought about this, since I've been here about 5 years. I'll probably talk about this story in Acts 12 maybe 2 or 3 times. We should talk about it a lot, because it's a true Red Sea moment for Peter. In Acts chapter 12, Peter is going to be killed. There is no way he's going to get out of this. Beginning in verse 1, it says, Now about that time Herod the king, Acts 12, verse 1, stretched out his hand to harass some from the church. That's a wrong move. Then he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword, and because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread, so when he had arrested him, he put him in prison, delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers. Each squad is 4. So 16 soldiers are going to guard him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover. Peter was therefore kept in prison, but constant prayer was offered to God for him by the church. That's a powerful thing. And when Herod was about to bring him out that night, Peter was sleeping bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers. How in the world are you going to get out of this? And the guards before the door were keeping the prison. And if I understand it right, there's several guards at the door, and then there's another gate and another one, and there's guards all the way. Total of 16 assigned to make sure he's not going to escape, because he's going to be killed and persecuted. Now behold, an angel of the Lord, verse 7, stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. And he struck Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise quickly. And his chains fell off his hands. Miraculous. Miracle. The angel said to him, Gird yourself and tie on your sandals. And so he did, and he said to him, Put on your garments and follow me. Now you might wonder why the guards aren't waking up during all this. God has something to do with that as well. And it says, so he went out and followed him, and he did not know that what was done by the angel was real. You ever had something like that happen to you? We've had a few of those. But thought he was seeing a vision. When they were past the first and the second guard post, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them on its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. When Peter had come to himself, he said, "Now I know for certain the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all the expectation of the Jewish people." What was that? And they're all coming out the next day to see him killed. So when he had considered this, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice because of her gladness, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter stood before the gate. They said to her, "You are beside yourself." Why did they say that? Red Sea moment. You ain't getting out of this. Now they were praying, but you got to remember, James had already been persecuted, and we can't explain why God let some die and he didn't others, except he had obviously more plans for Peter. And you are beside yourself. Yet she kept insisting it was so. They said it must be his angel. Now Peter continued knocking. When they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But motioning to them with his hand to keep silent, he declared to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. He said, "Go tell these things to James and to the brethren." And he departed and went to another place. Then as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers about what had become of Peter. When Herod had searched for him and not found him, he examined the guards and commanded that they should be put to death, and went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. Now you keep reading in this story, and of course you find out God is going to, just shortly after this, going to kill him. He is persecuting God, he's persecuting the church, and there's just no hope for a man like that. Herod should have had a Red Sea moment and should have changed, because there is no hope. If you go against God, there's just no hope. The only hope we have is to go with God. I want to read a couple of verses to you before we close. About this idea, we all know it. And there's probably, you let me know if you're exempt from what I'm about to say after services, not during services, but after services. When our fear exceeds our faith. It happens. It's human. But God would have us not to do that. Let our faith exceed our fear, whatever situation you're in. 2 Timothy 1, verse 7 says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear." That's cowardly fear. And we're not talking about reverential fear. That's a good thing. Cowardly fear. But of power, what has God given us? Power, love, and a sound mind. That's what God has given us. What God wants us to have. Turn back to the Old Testament, Psalm 55. I want you to think about the Red Sea moment that the Israelites experienced, and maybe you've experienced. I can tell you I've had mine. Psalm 55, verse 22. "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he shall sustain you. He shall never," listen to this, now God doesn't say something, and we say that, we make the statement, never say never, because you're going to come back and find yourself having to realize you shouldn't have done that. God will do it. And it says here, "He shall never permit the righteous to be moved." We need to believe that. And if you keep going in chapter 56 and verse 1, "Be merciful to me, O God, for man would swallow me up, fighting all the days he oppresses me." David could surely say this. "My enemies would hound me all day, for there are many who fight against me, O Most High. Whenever I'm afraid, I will trust in you." That's the right idea. Whenever I'm afraid, I will trust in you. Don't let your fear exceed your faith. In God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what can flesh do to me. All day they twist my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They gather together. They hide. They mark my steps. When they lie in wait for my life, shall they escape by iniquity? In anger cast down the people, O God. You number my wanderings, put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book? When I cry out to you, then my enemies will turn back. This I know, because God is for me. In God I will praise his word, and the Lord I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Vows made to you are binding upon me, O God. I will render praises to you, for you have delivered my soul from death. Have you not kept my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? We can say the same things David says, if it's a condition, we walk with God. We've got to walk with it. We can't decide that he's going to be there for me if I don't. He tells me that I have to walk with him. Now, whether you believe in God or not, you're going to have Red Sea moments in your life. But if you walk with God, he's going to deliver you through them. His way, you might have thought after it was over with, I think I would have done that differently. I wouldn't have done it the way he did it. But that's okay. Because our ways are not his ways. His ways are higher than ours. Let's just trust him. Let's think about that as we stand and sing. And we'll take this song.